On this episode of AV Week, supporting women for International Women's Day, what we can do as an industry to support women in AV, new design services that help you check your specs and check your designs, whether you're a consultant or an in-house integration firm, 8K for live sports in the AV industry. All that and more. Next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 446, recorded Friday, March 6th, 2020. No jerks allowed.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Sure, Sound Extraordinary,
and by
Peerless AV, driving technology through innovation,
and by
Atlona, the go-to provider for AV signal distribution and control in corporate, higher education, and residential spaces.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information we have gathered this week, first and foremost, the industry icon extraordinaire, the elder statesman, and one of my lovely mentors, Mr. Brock McGinnis from AVWeek. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tim. How are you?
I am well. If you are not watching the video, Mr. McGinnis is in the throngs of the Canadian wilderness, utilizing Zoom's fantastic auto green screen feature. So it's fantastic. All right, Mr. Joel Carroll also joins us, my buddy from Atlanta, who is working with Immersive now. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Good to be here. Good to see you.
Absolutely. And last but not least, a new guy, so you two be nice to him, Dana Corey from AVWeek. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's kick this off. First thing we're going to start with is actually 8K, and don't throw things at me. And don't yell at me or virtually, or you can email me if you want, tim@avnation.tv, and tell me I'm crazy. But here's the thing: we are getting into the era of 8K. As much as folks will deny that or say no, we're not, or where's the transport. The other common pushback against 8K is where's the content. This story answers that very question. Our friends over at AV Magazine, Samsung and BT Sport achieved the UK's first 8K content creation. It was Arsenal versus Olympiacos, UEFA European League match for the QLED 8K TVs. What happened was, it was the UK's very first 8K sports was outdoor broadcast setup. Brock, I'm going to start with you on this. We have been following, I'm going to say for 6 years, and I may be off on that a little bit, but we've been following the Japanese broadcasting companies move to 8K ahead of the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. This is the first time I've really seen anybody outside of Japan make a play and make a good case for 8K in not just in general, right? Because folks are shooting on it, they're doing recordings and tapings on it. But this was the first live sporting event outside the Japanese islands that I've seen. Somebody really make a good case for this. Is it something where we have to start taking notice of now as integrators and as an industry?
No.
No? Okay. Good deal. I'm out.
I think maybe that 5 or 6 years ago we had some of the same conversations about 4K.
Yes.
And we whinged about the content, the transport. We whinged about the cameras. We whinged about the costs, and that nobody was ever going to buy it. And I can't think that anybody who is listening to this show today doesn't have a 4K TV. So we're all going to have 8K TVs. It's a wonderful thing. It's a reason for the industry to spend money. We'll all upgrade our switching, we'll upgrade our transport, we'll upgrade our capture, and it's a fantastic thing. And my only comment is it's good they started with soccer, because that sport is so slow. They don't have to worry about frame rate stuff.
Well, they could have started with baseball. That's a slower sport,
Correct.
Or
Correct.
curling,
Correct. But I don't know about you, Tim. I really enjoy hockey in 4K.
I do too. I really do. So speaking
Yeah,
of which, the Blues will be, doing the Winter Challenge, the Winter Classic next year with the Wild. So
yeah, Tim, I
ahead,
think
Dana.
if we look at 4K, it's and an 8K too. It's about its ripple effect or significance that affects the overall industry itself. So 8K being popular at larger events and where these visual places are. But as we get to places like where we operate in the corporate meeting rooms, I mean, we're still struggling with HD cameras and 4K TVs, and so we know it's to Rock's point, it's going to come. It's just at what pace and where. And before we hit the panic button on replacing all the panels to 8K, it's really more about like when's it going to hit that particular spot,
Yeah.
So just another perspective around it's important, but when is it important?
Well, that's a good point, though. When is it important? And Joel will bring you on that with that question. Immersive transports, audio and video wirelessly.
Right.
You guys are part of that transport conversation. When is it important, or is it by segment? Is it by the vertical? Because right now we're talking about sports, right?
Right.
We're not talking about corporate yet. Dana made a good point. Some of the integrators are still trying to upgrade their folks to from 720 to full HD, let alone 4K.
I think it starts to become important. Like in this case, what I see, this is starting in the residential world in reality. So kind of starts there. We'll see it populate. I mean, I believe you can buy the 8K if you go to Samsung and you go to Costco and pick it up. For us, when it starts to become, well, you can, right? I mean, you walk in and it's splashy and it's cool.
Hang on. I'm going to check that out to see if I can. What you keep talking. Hang on.
Of course. But to me, what's unique about it in our world is we are part of transport. I'm in a wireless nature at this point. I don't foresee wireless 8K coming. And I saw something talking about 48 gigabits of data uncompressed. I mean, that was pretty impressive. They're able to do that, right? And it's in a controlled environment. Our computers right now and our devices right now have a hard time doing, let's say, even 4K wireless. That's starting to come out. It's starting to be there. Even in my home, my experience with trying to do it from my phone to Apple TV, it's not been grand, right? And I don't have a lot of devices on my network. So I don't know. I think honestly, at the end of the day, when does it become important? When the customer comes and says to us, we have this and we want to be able to support it and we want to be able to do it. And that's when I feel in our industry, we're going to start seeing that importance. 4K still is just starting to get adopted, I feel, whether it's with what we're doing at Immersive or a lot of the other manufacturers in general. We're just starting getting true adoption of being able to take advantage of the pixels.
Yeah, I have a question for you guys. In the world of visual collaboration or meeting rooms, you guys know there's a direct correlation between distance and resolution sitting. Imagine an 8K display in a room. The fonts are like this small. So now we're back to like enlarging fonts. To
Right.
What benefit? Where does that trade-off come in? And I'm not an expert on that part of it. It just feels like when I look at 4K displays, I'm doing 150% on the fonts so I can see them, at 8 feet away or 10 feet away. Just a thought too on resolution to viewing, especially as we look at the greater population.
No, I think that's a good point.
Okay, so to that end, and I did look up 8K TVs while Joel was talking. The first thing I'm going to point out is right back to what Dana was saying. You can pick up a 55-inch 8K UHD TV with HDR for $2,500 at let's call it a big box store, not Costco. The Costco one.
Hang on a second, Tim. You just said 8K and UHD.
I'm reading it off the screen.
Yeah,
I'm just reading it off the screen.
So
technically, it's 4320p, which is nowhere near 8K. Okay, so let's start there.
Yes.
At least the Costco one, at least the specs seem a little bit more true. It's an LG 8K, and LG doesn't. This is a commercial for a Costco or LG, but for $5,000, a 75-inch, again 8K UHD, which is whatever. So you can get an 8K TV, was what they're calling 8K at least. For $5,000 at Costco. Now the resolution for that is close, as close as the Samsung, which was this resolution is 7680 by 4320. So it is the 8K version of UHD, right? So 4K UHD versus 8K UHD.
As an integrator, I'll comment on when we started putting 4K TVs in.
Okay.
No meeting room needs a 4K TV unless people are in the media and advertising industry. I don't think there's any question about that. But when the manufacturers 4K TVs have all of their best features and all of their best technology, and it is a minuscule price difference between the 4K and the 2K, sell them in the 4K, because who doesn't want better, right? Who doesn't want better? And certainly some of the large display sizes, the 75 inches, the 80 somethings, the 90 somethings, they actually benefited from the smoothness of the image in 4K, even with standard business content. So it looked a little bit better. And the contrast was a little bit better, but nobody is going to need 8K for another 3 or 4 years, because this is the cycle that we seem to be running on. The Olympics are a huge driver of video technology, absolutely enormous, because the whole world watches it. And of course, this year there may not be any spectators in the stands, so there'll be even more people on TV. Watching the TV, and it's great. Technology continues to advance. That's what employs each and every one of us, and we like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. If you're not familiar, pay attention to some of the advances that happen every 4 years, both from a broadcast standpoint. They really do treat the Olympics as a crown jewel every 4 years, to kind of take some of the things that they've been working on from a broadcast standpoint and take them out for a spin, and then eventually start implementing them.
I was at a Winter Olympics as a guest of Panasonic years and years and years ago, where they were debuting 3D. And they had some of their first 3D camera equipment and some of their first 3D rendering. And by the Summer Olympics 2 years following, 3D was the big gig. Yeah. And we all bought TVs that had 3D in them. Not that we ever used it, but because those were the TVs that offered all of the other latest features that those manufacturers offered. And they were only $75 more.
And I will point out that even from a event standpoint, the Beijing Olympics, when they had projection mapping on the field, where they had those scrolls unrolling, was the first time a lot of people, especially the vast majority of the vast audience, saw something like that, right? And I don't know if I'm allowed to say, let's just say it's a projector manufacturer north of me. How about that? In another country other than the United States, that was a part of that, right? And they have since gone on and they've done some really interesting things as well, including being a part of most of the NHL ice projections. So
right. Brock said a comment a minute ago I'd like to go back to, where we don't need that resolution, and I see it slightly different. I like the concept of having that resolution, especially when you're in these more collaborative environments now. The more pixels that you have, the more to post, the more pieces of content you can put up there side by side with good quality. I mean, even I've got a 4K TV that's arm's reach away from me right now, and it looks great. But now if I start putting, 10 different people's pieces of content, which is how a lot of us are now starting to meet, it's going to get to be more and more difficult and see those on that one display, just because of the quality of the pixel. It's going to be silly 4K. It's going to be too big to be able to have a good quality image. So I actually,
the discussion then, Joel, becomes about the canvas.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, and then what can you do with that canvas, and who gets to draw on it? So
I still think that the eye still is the key factor. I get that it's going to be a cleaner picture of the Brady Bunch on the screen, if you will, of all the people, but will I be able to embrace the value of it, because because the eye has a limit too, a distance. So right. We always want to have that thing with going larger as you go back and getting smaller as you come forward. It's just a fine line that I think resolution. And again, I'm all for it. Just as Brock said, I want to refresh in a couple of years too.
Sure.
Selfish reasons. Yeah. So, but it kind of makes you ponder a little bit. But.
All right. From our website, AV Checkpoint is launching a new assistant system in AV system design. Actually, our buddy Mike Tomei. Mike is a former technology manager. Actually, not for nothing, but he used to be a tech manager at Harvard, which is not exactly a slouch gig. Also worked for, I think, a college in New York. He went out on his own as a consultant a number of years ago, and part of that is he is launching this AV checkpoint system. And what it is, it's a third-party peer review service, giving anybody design AV that's designing AV systems kind of a check and recheck. Joel, I want to start with you on this. Having somebody to kind of go over your system, whether that's utilizing it from a tech manager standpoint, which is a lot of where Mike's thinking is, because let's be honest, folks like our buddy Joe Way at USC and Scott Tyner up in at Bates College up in Maine, they're creating their own kind of in-house integration firms. They're utilizing when they can't handle it, they're utilizing integration houses when they can't, but when they can, they're designing their own systems. Having somebody checking your work, though, and having a third party, I don't think is a bad idea. What are some of the things, though, that might get lost in the shuffle if you're not familiar, let's say, with a MRSA product, and suddenly you're given something that, oh, this has MRSA in it. So how do we bridge that lack of knowledge?
Well, I think the concept that he's bringing, I think, is unique. I mean, it's up to us then as a manufacturer to make sure that he knows, the ins and the outs, right? Working with him to make sure he has the details and the training. He's got a lot of certifications. If you look at his website, I think from the manufacturer standpoint, that's our responsibility to make sure he knows that stuff. What I think's unique about what he's doing is, like you were saying, there's a lot of these guys that are building their AV integration teams within the school. I mean, that's really what they are. They're their own internal company. And a lot of times with those people, they don't want to talk to the manufacturer right away. They don't want to talk to the integrator right away because they're trying to figure out how to put their design together. And I respect that, and I totally understand. This gives them another outside view that's not going to be, this has to be immersive, or this has to be, whatever other manufacturer he might be speccing. He can help see where some of those issues are. And along with that, again, help guide them to the right solution. I've had a problem because I wired it this way. Have you thought of doing it this way? I think it's great. I think what he's doing is awesome. But again, for our standpoint, it's going to be our job to make sure and all the people that he's going to be bringing into this, because it's a network of people, from what I understand, it's our job as a manufacturer to make sure everybody knows the ins and outs and how to use the system and how to set it up. I mean, that's kind of where I see the issue is if they don't, then they may pull that manufacturer out and put in somebody else.
Dana, this is kind of unique, at least to me. I've not seen something like this. So how, as Joel said, how do you guys as manufacturers make sure that you get in there and make sure that your products and your systems are known by these folks?
A lot more flights and dinners.
Yeah. It's a challenge because competence of partners and manufacturers they vary, right? So, what's baseline to start from, and I think it's good to have somebody in there that is providing the checkpoints that either keep us in check as manufacturers or with the partners to help them get to the right level. It's just something that we all struggle with training our own people over time and the evolution of your own sales or technical structure to keep everybody aware. So having checkpoints is good. I just kind of wonder who's checking the checkpoint, and what's the validation at the end when I get checked, right? Do I get rubber stamp? What do I get something I can carry forward? And I don't know a lot about this, so I'm only asking not as a question of validity, but just kind of what comes to my mind at first glance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I brought it in, is because if this is, again, I think this is new and unique. Brock, you worked for an integrator for a number of years in Toronto. You've now gone out on your own. This is kind of, again, Mike's going out on his own and expanding into a different area. This is something, though, that we've watched. I've watched you over the last 6 months or so kind of figure out where your next step was. I watched Mike as he was doing that. We actually had a conversation just a few minutes ago with Wallace Johnson on a special we're doing. Wallace has gone out on his own as the brain trust of the industry, looks at the industry and looks at the kind of the landscape. It seems to me that there are as many folks that are saying, you know what, I'm going to kind of do my thing right now, and I'll help you out, and I'll help you out, and I'll give you all the knowledge. Is this an era of kind of not quite a Renaissance man and woman, but an area of where the folks that we all have kind of known and trust and not just admired but also leaned on for advice, they're saying, you know what, I'm going to use this and I'm going to give back to the community, back to the industry in a way that not only supports my family but also helps as many people as possible.
Not the question I expected, Tim. So the industry is consolidating.
Yeah.
And the bigger companies are getting bigger, and the bigger manufacturers are getting bigger. The integrators are getting bigger. The consulting firms, the wonderful little AV consulting firms that we've known across the continent throughout our careers, they are being absorbed into huge multinational MEP firms, architecture firms, in one case, a food service company. So the flip side of that consolidation is perhaps a recognition that the expertise in the industry has always resided in people, not in the badge that's on the door.
Mhm.
And so I have an awful lot to offer as an individual. Mike has a tremendous amount to offer as an individual. But we're no longer part of huge monolithic organizations where we can offer everything to everybody all the time. And so the choice becomes, do you narrow your focus and say, this is the lane I swim in, this is who I can help, and this is how I can help them. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of this, because there are going to be a lot more people, quote unquote, out on the street, not as a result of, but in response to or reaction to some of the mergers and acquisitions and other commercial transactions that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
I love what Mike is doing. So in the construction industry, there is a trade known as quantity surveyors. Quantity surveyors take a project, or they'll work with the architectural community, and the architect told the owner, I can build this building for $20 million. And the owner hires a quantity surveyor and says, okay, how much is this building actually going to cost before we put it out to tender? We have a huge issue in the AV world of owners who have dreams this big and end up with budgets this big, and integrators get squeezed, manufacturers get squeezed, and most of all, users get ripped off, because everything that we conceived of being able to deliver to the user came down to a cut in a construction budget.
Yeah.
And it may have been because the steel was more costly than was anticipated. It may have been a whole nother bunch of factors. So I see Mike being able to, and whoever his team is, and I'm sure his team will be top notch, because he's got high standards. And maybe he's going to bring AQAV in, maybe he's going to, some of the other standards-based organizations. But I think there's a place for an in-house integration company like Joe Way operates at USC, to be able to go to Mike and say, okay, before I tell the powers that be that this is a $4 million project, put a second set of eyes on this and let me go to my budget chief with a real number that has been validated, not by what my hopes and dreams are, or how I think I'm going to squeeze, 10 pounds of AV into a 5-pound bag, but you tell me how much that's going to cost. Some of the other validation I think that is going to happen is there's a lot of AV designs that occur 2 to 3 years prior to a project being constructed. Joel, you've run into this, for years and years and years. Particularly MEP people, they are being motivated by delivering construction drawings that match up with an architect's delivery schedule, and it could be way before they know what the budget is. It could be way before they know what the user wants. And certainly 2 or 3 years in the AV technology world is a lifetime. Can be a whole product cycle.
Absolutely.
So for an owner to take their 2 to 3 year old design that has been properly rendered and cabled and powered and blocked within the construction drawings, but for them to be able to deliver that to Mike and his team and say, would you mind updating this before we go out to tender so that the integrators don't have to do it? And we can actually have an apples to apples comparison rather than what we've been experiencing over and over, which is 5 different system responses because the original documentation is so far out of date.
Yeah, absolutely.
My 2 cents.
No, and it's a great 2 cents because and not only that, but even if you do hire a consultant, as a former tech manager here who has been a part of both consultant driven and internally driven projects, you can even take that back out and say, take it to his team and say, this is what the consultant has given us. Give us, another set of eyes. It almost, checking the checkers, right?
Yeah.
So, all right,
I
guys.
like that idea, Tim, you bring up, because you're not taking one consultant's work necessarily to another consultant, right? So
No.
Right.
it's just a third-party review, and I think that could provide a lot of value.
I think so too.
I wish that this would have happened 15 years ago, and the president that I had to deal with at the time, we had that, because let's just say there were some projects that did not have that and should have. So real quickly, guys, March 8th is International Women's Day. And the story we'll put a link on is from our buddies over at Commercial Integrator. Really, really cool things happen with the AVIXA Women's Council, both at ISC. Actually, my editor, Mitchell, and I just came back from Chicago. We went to the AVIXA Women's event in Chicago yesterday on Thursday. Real quickly, though, there's 3 guys on this call. So briefly, and Joe, we'll start with you on this. How can we, being the middle-aged white guys that we are, assist? How can we support women in the industry and further them along?
Well, one is, I think in some cases, get people to know that there's even this industry. And I think that's part of the issue as well. When people are looking at IT and talking to them, say, hey, have you thought about this? And look at this in a kind of a different light. I mean, my wife's in the industry. And so I kind of take this as, kind of a special heart with Erica, going to those events and, just talking to people and making them feel at one. I mean, one of the things that you always see with these different events, there's always these groups of people that will kind of click together. And you typically, in many cases, get a bunch of guys in one corner, a bunch of women in the other corner. And I'm not with the guys. I'm over talking to the women, talking to everybody else, because it's a lot. I'd like to hear some of the things that are challenges for them. So, I can change it and promote that change. Some of the things, is just be supportive. I mean, one of the big things you've been to these events, Tim, the AVIXA Women's Council, it's not just for women.
No.
Right. We all have an invite. And to me, that's awesome. And I don't think all the guys out there know that, but going to those events and supporting and learning from the people that are, the women that are out there in the industry, that's what I'm trying to do, is find out what can I do to change? What can I do to promote? I have all these great ideas. They're probably 100% wrong. Most of my ideas are wrong anyways, I'm told by Tim, but besides the point, to me, if I'm able to actually go out there and find out right at the source what I can do to be active and be proactive, I think that's what we need more people to do, have that comfort level of stepping outside of our comfort zone to find out what we could do different, what we could change.
Yeah, very good. Brock, your wife is also in the industry, so how do we support those?
I'm hoping we have to do less and less support.
Okay.
Finally, we have a generation of people who grew up with the same tech. There wasn't boys tech and girls tech. It wasn't boys playing video games. Girls played whatever girls played. And so I think that as an industry, we're a heck of a lot more accessible and interesting for people of all genders, because they've all grown up with the same influences. And and Patricia and I have an 11-year-old. I look at his generation and it's spectacular. He has friends who are females. He doesn't even think about the fact that there's a gender difference. They go off to the movies, they go off and do things. And so, some of those traditional barriers that my generation or your generation, Tim, might have had where people were role cast and stereotyped by their parents, by their educators. I think some of those things are breaking down. I will say that in the audiovisual industry or a whole bunch of others, I think women have, from a sales perspective, a huge advantage over most of us guys, and that involves listening skills, and it involves empathy, and some more innate ability to connect on a personal level. And my wife is a tremendously successful salesperson. Is that the kind of role, Joel, that Erica is in as well?
Erica's a training manager, so she's in a training role, and
even
she's
better
out in front of people on a regular basis. Yeah,
absolutely. All right,
so
Dan.
I think one of the things, though, to kind of what Brock's is saying, and maybe I'm stepping outside, but the biggest thing is don't treat people differently. It doesn't matter. I mean, and if we can start doing that alone, or if I learn how I'm treating someone differently because somebody brings it to my attention, that's what's important to me. And that's why I go into those things. I think it's important for everybody. We just got to stop treating everybody differently. And I'm actually seeing that change over the last few years. I have to say, I've been very impressed with, you don't see some of the traditional old, bunch of guys hanging around and making these comments. I don't hear that almost anywhere I go anymore. And I really appreciate that.
Yep.
And everybody's treated the same. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are. They're a person doing a job. And that's the first thing everybody needs to do is go that route.
Absolutely. All right, Dana, last word on this. How do we support the women in our industry and get more in them?
I think, like Joel mentioned, it's, the excitement to be in the industry is one part of it, is to stimulate an outreach. And I know we're doing that in our industry, but maybe more of that outreach out. I think we have a generation coming in of women who have been around technology, and that's where we are obviously in. And that's going to change behavior and interest to come into our space too. So I think just by default, the tools that they lived and grew up with are going to generate some spawning of I want to be in that space, and how we outreach and create excitement is there. I also think in our hiring process, not only hiring to bring women in, but also hiring people who embrace that idea too, right? I've always had a policy in a company which is no jerks allowed kind of scenario, because we get one jerk, they end up being two jerks, and it's 5 jerks, right? There's another word for that, but we'll not do that here. So I think there's that side of it too, is that we, on the other side, we hire properly to embrace that. To Joel's point too, is that I've been surrounded by women my entire career in this space. Not as many as I would like because of that reason that Brock brought up, but it is a circle of life that we have to embrace, both on exciting them and bringing them in, embracing them, but also making sure we don't hire the jerks that stop that.
I like that. That'd be a good place to stop. All right, gentlemen, thank you all so much. Mr. Joel Carroll from Immersive, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tim. It's good having me. It's good being here with you, Tim. Thank you for having me as well.
How do people get a hold of your wife if they'd like to get a hold of Erica?
So to get in touch with Erica, there's a few different ways, but one of them is Erica Carroll at lona.com. If you want to get in touch with her. Myself, if you want to get in touch with me, it's J Carroll, JCARROLL at Mersive.com.
And I was somewhat giving him a hard time, but Erica's doing some really great stuff with training outside of Atlanta. She has an organization called Lava.
Correct. Yeah. Lava Revolution is something that she's actually re-energizing and starting again here in the next month or so. We're going to be seeing. So check that out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it's on Facebook as well. So you can.
It is correct.
All right, Mr. McGinnis, how do people get a hold of you, sir?
I'm on the Twitter at Brock McGinnis, where you can find me fairly regularly. And my email address these days is brock at avitas, AVITAAS.com.
Very good. And Mr. Dana, I appreciate it, sir. How do people get a hold of you or Avicor?
I'm not on the social too much. I'm on LinkedIn if you're ever on there once in a while, but you can find me that way. And then my email address is dana.corey@avicor.com.
All right, very good. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one story that's not really, you guys can comment if you'd like, but our buddy Luke Jordan and his family at Electric Acoustics, they were awarded the 2020 Grand Fort Award at the Chamber of Commerce and the Mayor of Fort Worth's annual address. This past week. So it is we used to be called the Small Business of the Year Award, but now it's called something else. But so basically, the folks over at Electric Acoustics and the Jordans got nicely awarded last week, and I wanted to say congratulations to them. For Tim Albright, don't follow me on the Twitters. I mentioned the Blues; they are still playing hockey. Apparently, football is going on in St. Louis. I'm not aware of it, but it's something called the XFL. Somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I'm old enough to remember the first time the XFL tried something, so we'll see. But go by the website if you would, please, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You will find this program and a host of others. A couple of programming notes happening. We are actually going to be producing a special on the coronavirus and the impacts it's having on the live staging and events industry and live staging and events folks. Actually, we'll be posting shortly after AVWeek post. We've already recorded that. Some really good advice, some really good insight from Tom Stimson and Lindsay Martin Bilberry and everybody, Wallace Johnson. So check for that on Monday. Also, we're going to be heading out and about, assuming that those events still happen. Mr. Matt Scott will be at Digital Signage Expo, DSC 2020 in Vegas. I will be hanging out with the Almo E4 folks in DC. Their event did get canceled this coming week because the state of California issued a state of emergency because of said coronavirus. So not going to Santa Clara, but we are headed to DC, so you can catch us there. So all that and more at avnation.tv. avnation.tv. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have for AV Week. I can have Mitchell edit you in if you want. I can just
no, not at all, not at all. You guys keep going. But
or Dana can mouth it, and then you could say it, and then I can have Mitchell put that in. He's very talented.
Yes, I love
He's
it.
a very talented editor. All right. If you ever meet Mitchell, you'll have to tell him I said. Well, I'm recording now, so.